So as long as it's okay with everybody, we're recording so that we can have a documentation of the meeting. Um, Thank you, Craig, for doing that. I'll give a little bit of an introduction on what's going to be discussed. Then we'll have a little presentation on kind of the history and the context of what could make a campaign to redistribute corporate wealth possible, and what that could look like. We'll have some comments from, so those of us who organized the event are from all coming from Oakland. We're members of the Rank and File Caucus, which is yeah, a group within the Oakland Education Association. So then we'll next hear from speakers from other unions. We have Sarita from UESF and Bob from ASTU. We'll then have time for participant discussion. We'll have breakout rooms and then report back from breakout rooms. And then finally closing and next steps. So some context about why we're here and really some words of wisdom that can set the context are the words of Dr. King, who said, "When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. We must recognize that we can't solve our problem until there is radical redistribution of economic and political power. The whole structure of American life must be changed." So what was Dr. King saying here? That the way that capitalism, racism, and militarism intertwine means that the way that we address those evils also has to be intertwined, right? So that really informs our strategic approach to this fight for public education, and our understanding that we have to undo all of them and understand the way that they're connected and the way that trickles down into the defunding of public education, among many other things. So a little bit of context on the We Can't Wait campaign, in case you haven't heard of it. So this is a coordinated, or to an extent coordinated, campaign across, right now it's 32 CTA, California Teachers Association locals. And 11 of those locals actually have aligned their contracts. So those contracts are expiring in June 2025. And the idea is that these locals are united on these key stated demands for fully funded schools, stability for our students, and living wage for educators. At the present moment, the sort of structure of the We Can't Wait campaign, so you could see in the photo, this was a rally that had members from UTR, the United Teachers of Richmond, and Oakland Education Association, and UESF from San Francisco as well, back in February. Thus far, the way that the campaign appears to be structured is mostly with CTA staff and union leaderships and big bargaining teams kind of driving the bus. There is a group called the California Alliance for Community Schools, CACS, that meets and discusses what's next in the We Can't Wait campaign, which is largely like, leadership picked, or mostly just members of union leaderships that participate in those meetings. And so the purpose of the discussion today is to think about what is actually the potential within this very, like, how do we say this? Exciting possibility of this coordinated campaign across California locals to push that to become a statewide campaign. The reasons for what that means and why are that the root causes of, so yes, we are facing budget cuts and layoffs in a number of districts, all kinds of budget austerity, and certainly in Oakland and in many other of your districts as well, facing district mismanagement, and basically not a prioritization of funding to the school site, and instead we have bloated administrations and all kinds of mismanagement of money at the district level. So yes, we do have problems at the local level, but the root causes are really at the state and federal level. The defunding of education, and certainly we see that in California, even in a blue state like California. And so the point here is that the chop from the top, like rhetoric, yes, it can do something to rearrange the way funding is distributed at the local level, but it's not enough. And the reason California is one of the lowest, I think it's somewhere in the 40s in the current rankings of how much it actually spends on public education, and yet there is so much wealth in this state that really could be used for our students and for us. So we also are facing additional potential losses as the Department of Education on a federal level is being dismantled as we speak. And so the idea here is if we do have a limited scope, if our only target is our local school districts, and yes, we might be aligned on the date, but our only target is just to ask them to give the teachers a little bit more, then we're going to have a limited outcome, and maybe we'll get them to give the teachers a little bit more, but we're not going to actually change the structure of what causes us to have these fights constantly. And so in summary, the We Can't Wait campaign really presents a historic opportunity because this really is the first time in history that California's two teacher unions, so both California Federation of Teachers, CFT, and CTA, California Teachers Association, are organizing a network of the largest unions to take action statewide. If this continues to be just sort of like symbolic or top-down rallies where we agree that we all can't wait, and then we continue to bargain on a local level for, crumbs, so to speak, in our contracts, then we would have the potential to get crumbs. But if we can really organize a mass, broad rank and file campaign where regular teachers are aware of what's happening, engaged and interested in pushing for corporate wealth redistribution at the state level, then we really have a potential for change here. So to reach this potential, what do we have to do? First, explicitly call for the redistribution of corporate wealth in California, right? We have to literally say, tax the rich gets onto that the trajectory, but it goes a little farther than that. Looking at I think it's over 100 billionaires that are here in California, and how that wealth doesn't have anything to do with what we see in the public schools. So explicitly making this part of the campaign. Organizing from the bottom up. So as I mentioned earlier, if it's just kind of union leaderships that are making the calls here, and it's not actually a groundswell of regular teachers who are engaged and participating, there's no real threat to the current structure. We also have the opportunity to link our fight to other struggles for democracy and equality against oppression happening both here and abroad. Of course, we are in the midst of very concerning attacks on immigrants, attacks on workers more broadly, and also the ongoing wars that the U.S. is engaged in, the genocidal imperialist war campaign in Palestine. So the opportunity to link our struggles to those ongoing campaigns, I think, is important to mention. And then finally, breaking from the Democratic Party is essential. So the way that the California Teachers Association and CFT policy traditionally rolls is there are lots of partnerships and lots of money exchanged between supporting Democrats and sort of this kind of truce almost, or this expectation that the Democrats have public education in their best interest. However, under Democratic regimes, we've seen the continued privatization of public resources, definitely including public schools. We see the defunding of public schools for sure. And we continue to be out here fighting for crumbs, even though we are in a Democratic Party state. So at this time, I'm passing it to, I think, Ronan, to continue forward with the presentation.
Thank you, Divya, and thanks so much, everybody, for being here on this Saturday morning together with us. Yeah, we want to talk about what are the possible challenges to a plan such as this. For many of us in our lifetimes, we've seen big social movements that call for a radical redistribution of wealth. Even within our own unions, we hear this kind of rhetoric around chop from the top. The money is there, we just need to get it. And so we wonder if it seems so intuitive to us in the classroom, and to us ordinary people, why can't this happen? Or why hasn't it happened? And so, as Divya was starting to get into, there's bigger structural factors at play. And so, in our rank and file caucus in Oakland, we've spent a lot of time and energy trying to involve ordinary members in the everyday workings of the union and in the bigger fights of the union, that could pose a challenge to this status quo. And over the years, we've realized that our parent union, the CTA, California Teachers Association, plays a very strong role in sort of attempting to tame the local, to keep members under the close control of our elected leaders, and especially to control our strikes and to control any actions that members do so that they're aligned with the CTA's agenda. So um, a couple of examples where this has happened is that in 2012, CTA actually opposed a statewide voters initiative for a millionaire tax. Similarly, the California Federation of Teachers, CFT, withdrew support for it. In 2020, CTA delayed support for Proposition 15, which would have generated billions of dollars for public schools by taxing commercial properties. It's most folks who have been in California for a minute know about the dreaded Prop 13 and how it allows big corporations who own a ton of land to not really pay their fair share of taxes. And as we all know from living here in California, the Democrats have been in control of our government for many, many years now, and yet we don't have Medicare for all. We don't have fully funded public schools. And at our local level, at least in Oakland, we've seen many Democratic Party leaders who treat teachers the same as Republicans do in their red state counterparts. And so we think that overall, we need to challenge the system that is in place. And we have some ideas about how to do that. If we could hop forward to the next slide, MC. So we think, we're in unprecedented times. And so we have to think outside of the box of what we've been doing for the last few years in our locals. And we have some inspirational examples of things that have actually worked. Back in the 60s and 70s, there were major, struggles of teachers that went alongside with and in synchrony with the civil rights movement struggles of the day. And in our own recent history, we saw a massive strike wave of teachers in the so-called Red State Rebellion or Red State teacher strikes. So this 2018 strike wave had a bottom-up character. Members weren't really being served by their unions, and so they organized through online platforms and took action. And these strikes happened across 8 or 9 states. And they had between like 5,000 to 30,000 educators. People targeted the state governments. And if you're watching the screen right now, you can see that 2, 4, 6, 7, or 8 of the states, 8 out of 10 of these states, this, kind of rank and file rebellion of teachers actually resulted in policy changes in the amount of funding that went directly to schools. Also, teachers saw raises of between, I think 2% was the lowest in one state. Most were around 5 or 6%. And then I think Arizona got the big kahuna with like 30%. So yeah, we think that this has worked. And we think we need to build a movement with a mass strike tactic as the goal. And so if we look at the benefits that are possible, or going back to that question of where's the money, if we were to reform Prop 13 in the state of California, that could give K through 12 schools a share of $4 billion. If we have an oil severance tax, as in Alaska, we could get $2.5 billion. If we have even a tiny little tax on the top 0.01% of earning people, the billionaires of California, that's really one of the biggest sources. We could get almost $8 billion. And so in total, if we just apply a little bit of taxes to these ultra wealthy people in the state, we could look at $14 billion in increased funding overall. So that's 14 billion more for K through 12 schools, and for just our local in Oakland, it could be $107 million more per year. You know, the Oakland Unified School District just hit us with a big attack this year, where they cut almost $100 million, and most of those cuts came directly from our school sites. Um, and so, if we're talking about additional revenue that could fully fund the public schools without even addressing the own administrative load in our local, you know, Oakland administration, this would more than, you know, cover a lot of our needs. And so the impact that this could have on our schools is tremendous. As most of us know, you know, our schools have infrastructural issues. We have vermin infestations. We don't have clean water in Oakland. Kids are having to drink out of these filtered water sources. And there's only like one per school. And so sometimes they break, and, you know, all these sort of basic structural issues. And that doesn't even get into our classes having too many students and the issues that students deal with in their own communities that lead to, pardon me, chronic absenteeism, other, you know, social inequalities that are in our society that could be addressed and remediated through our schools. And so, yeah, I'm going to pass it off to an OG of our union, who's been with this campaign a long time, to talk about this OEA vision briefly, and then facilitators, just a time check. I think maybe we have about 5 more minutes on our presenting. So yeah, I'll pass it to you, Craig.
Thank you, Ronan. So where can this money go? And why do we need so much of it? Well, in 2007, our union's representative council, with reps from every Oakland public school, unanimously approved something called the OEA vision to try to spell out what this money is for. The vision identifies teaching and learning conditions that research and experience show to be effective and are essential for providing all students, especially those of greatest need, the best chance to succeed. And we believed it was critical to highlight the reality that achieving schools students deserve requires far more than some incremental improvements to awful conditions that we work under, and that can be funded by eliminating the wasteful spending by our school districts that we still have to continue to fight for. But it's not going to be nearly enough to realize high quality schools for all students. So among the key points in this vision, one is class size reduction, class size limits of 15. And we'll be told, of course, that this is so unrealistic, but it's not at all unrealistic for students in very expensive elite private schools where 15 is on the large size in elementary school classes. And sometimes you'll have 10 or 12 students and 2 teachers. And our students in public schools don't need that or deserve it any less. We need increased prep time. Again, something we don't dare to think about changing dramatically, and yet in many countries in Europe and Asia with highly lauded educational achievement, teachers have far more of their instructional day devoted to, sometimes a third of the day devoted to non-instructional tasks like developing lesson plans, sometimes with other teachers and collaboratively, and observing and reflecting on the implementation of these lesson plans to develop their practice and pedagogy. That's how great teachers are made. They're not born, and that's what we need here as well. And then we need, even with those reforms, an increase in direct support for so many struggling students, such as many more counselors, psychologists, social workers, and reading intervention. We had a reading clinic in Oakland for years that was just transformative for so many students who were struggling, and that was eliminated due to lack of funding. Improvements to educational and environmental conditions, you know, physical conditions in the classroom and in the schools are ones that we know very well, and those also cost a lot. So lessons from, you know, we got to this vision from lessons we learned, and one of the key lessons was from our 1995-96 strike that lasted for 26 days, that was for better pay and smaller class size. And we won a significant pay increase, but we got no class size reduction, even with strong support for that strike. But because it was, the longest strike in California history, a teacher strike in California history up until that point, it generated tremendous political pressure that forced the Republican governor to sign legislation that had been stalled to reduce class size in kindergarten through third grade throughout the state to 20, and that lasted for more than 10 years. Lessons from that strike include that if you organize well, and we had more than 100 House meetings across Oakland prior to the strike, you can win strong support. We did win strong support from Black and brown working class communities for these demands because they understand that this is something that benefits students across the board, and that the research showed that the best studies showed that students of color and low-income students benefited the most from small class size, and these studies were usually with class sizes of 13 to 17 students. We also learned that chop from the top is insufficient to achieve these fundamental improvements that students need. Even you're not going to get that even from reallocating the millions of dollars that is wasted on central office and consultants. And we have to continue to try to change that, but the district actually used chop from the top to divide us from classified workers and threaten that the classified workers' jobs would be cut to meet our demands. We have to be aware that if we are demanding an increase to educational spending on a statewide basis, that if we are not calling for an overall increase into the public sector through a redistribution of corporate wealth, that public schools will be pitted against other essential services for working people. And we also learned that local strikes can affect state policy. So moving from beyond chop from the top, we actually, launched a redistribute corporate wealth campaign in 2003 based on our experience, and held demonstrations and pickets and focused public attention through these events, these demonstrations at Clorox, major Fortune 500 company in Oakland, Kaiser City Center that was wholly owned by Shorenstein Properties then, and the Port of Oakland, which is hugely profitable, to demand that they be forced to pay for public schools and services. And the public attention that we generated, one concrete benefit that we achieved was that Kaiser was forced to finally accede to a demand from OEA and classified worker unions in the district to freeze rates on premiums for all OUSD employees for the first time. That was historic, and it lasted for at least a year. In 2010, this campaign became Bailout Schools, Not Banks. It was a coalition of OEA, SEIU, and a community organization, ACE, that picketed at banks and like Bank of America branches, Wells Fargo, Chase. We had sit-ins, and we again generated enough public attention that Wells Fargo executives were nervous enough to agree to hold a meeting with us to hear our demands, one of them being that they form a consortium with corporations and banks to bail out Oakland Public Schools from the state debt. They said we would never privatize a public debt, even though they had been bailed out by the public to the tune of trillions. But one last example of how the efforts of a few workers in a local union can reverberate beyond. The Adult School Teachers United in West Contra Costa County endorsed the We Can't Wait campaign and urged it to adopt the slogan, redistribute corporate wealth, make California pay. That inspired us in the Rank and File Caucus to take up this effort as well and to organize this town hall. So props to the adult school teachers in West Contra Costa County for that. And I will now pass it on to Shane.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Divya. Thank you, Ronan. Thank you, Jonah. So just, a few conclusions before we, hear from some of the wonderful teachers who came and joined us today from other locals. We see what, in this epic of historic challenges, that this kind of all the issues we face, our communities face, from climate change to attacks on LGBTQ everything in between. The We Can't Wait campaign presents an opportunity. I always question like what is the why did they choose the slogan of "We Can't Wait"? Because it seems like it even kind of goes against what their strategy is, which is at least they're claiming they're waiting to 2 years at this point to align contracts to expire at the same time. So maybe we can indeed strike. Now, obviously, there's been times in the past where they've had that opportunity. Like in 2019, there was an opportunity for both LA and Oakland teacher union locals to go on strike together. It could even added Sacramento and New Haven, as New Haven went on strike even after we did that spring. So for sure, like a statewide strike is really what we need, right? We've seen, places where there have been statewide strikes that have gotten teachers and other, public sector employees, gains that were desperately needed. Obviously, we're talking about red state revolts in West Virginia, Kentucky, Oklahoma, et cetera, et cetera. But for us in the Rank and File Caucus, it's really the bottom up strategy that, we've tried to, push for at least the last, 6 years since the 2019 strike. And that's the strength in any teacher union local and really any, trade union is from the rank and file. So as in a state like California, a deep blue state, we have to understand that the Democratic Party is going to control, what happens at the bargaining table through CTA. I think it was Bob Mandel who's on this call that told me that CTA is represents the bosses on our side of the table. In general, the strategy has to come from the rank and file in a more bottom-up fashion, because obviously we think chop from the top is not enough, but they're never going to chop from the top unless we force them to do that. And that money, again, this is why I think it's important. And I'll want to give credit to Craig for kind of being the catalyst for this what's happening right now, is because I think it is important that we can't just depend on the Democratic Party and through CTA for this what we really need, which is way more funding. So I will definitely look forward to continuing these conversations. And then we're going to move in now to hearing from other locals.
Thanks, Shane. I think first thanks everybody for the presentations. First, we'll hear from Sarita, who's here from UESF, and then we'll hear from Mr. Bob Mandel. So go ahead, Sarita. Thank you for being here.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for the invite. It's great to get to have some cross collaboration between our districts and to really start talking about making this campaign significant. So in UESF, similar to what's been happening in Oakland, we are seeing deteriorating conditions across our schools. The district is also basically participating in various kinds of union busting, and bad faith bargaining in our bargaining. At the same time, our union leaders aren't really giving us any kind of details in how we're going to carry out this We Can't Wait campaign, how we're going to escalate beyond what we did last year, and how we're going to unite with other districts. So some things that we're seeing, the district is only hiring teachers on temporary contracts to try and have hidden layoffs via consolidations. They're also doing hiring freezes of people on temporary contracts so that once they're consolidated, they can't get tenure by being rehired in the district for year 2 and 3, which is union busting. And so that drives up our classes where they're just perpetually subs. In several schools in the district, there are entire grades where students have subs in every single class. There are also huge class sizes. Our smallest class sizes are between 34 and 35 and up to 38. And they are cutting positions, which means that we get more higher class sizes. And then also the idea of chop from the top is being carried out in a very malicious way in SFUSD, because they're chopping the TSAs, teachers on special assignment, rather than these administrators. And the TSAs are actually student facing. They help create curriculum and they help support our students. Beyond that, the union refused to allow us to go on strike despite the fact that membership overwhelmingly voted to strike last year at 96%. Instead of going on strike, our union leadership took the deal with the district that they said was insulting 2 weeks prior in order to prevent the strike from happening. So we do have a workforce that's ready to strike, and we've demonstrated that time and time again, but we are kind of being siloed into these Democratic Party talking points and beliefs, and away from real radical activism and common good demands for our students, which we are trying to push for, things like taking empty SFUSD properties and turning them into housing for unhoused students and families, which was horribly voted down by the district and leadership. And then in our most recent bargaining, the district proposed removing time limits on our site-based meetings. They want to end our sabbatical program that helps retain the few educators we do have. They want to remove our prep periods granted to AP teachers and eliminate shared decision-making that we just won in 2023. And to cut substitute working conditions. So they're really trying to work against us as much as possible. And just to bring back in the corporate side of things, Salesforce, which paid no federal income tax the past 4 years, is getting free advertising in our schools by donating like a scant $1 or $2 million of their multi-billion-dollar revenue to certain select schools. And so they force us to have Salesforce Day and celebrate the fact that they're in reality stealing money from these children that they should be paying into the schools via taxes. So that's why we really see that it's necessary, especially in San Francisco, which is sort of a neoliberal paradise, to fight back against these corporations. I'm sure there's more, but I will cut it there. Thank you all for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Sarita. Yeah, definitely sounds familiar to what we're facing here in Oakland. So we'll hear from Mr. Bob Mandel, and then we will have some time for breakouts, folks. So if you're listening in, get your juices, flowing. We'd love to hear from everybody. Go ahead, Bob.
Yes, thank you. A lot of what Sarita said is what gave birth to the original RCW campaign in Oakland, because you could point at all these billion-dollar Fortune 500 companies that were not paying 1 penny and still don't pay 1 penny to the schools. Richmond is a disaster zone. My tiny union unwillingly is independent, not part of UTR, but we're intensely aware of what's going on. And again, the things Sarita just said describe the enormous number of classrooms staffed by subs, and not even subs. So they've brought in people who legally can't be in the classroom and so on. What I really want to talk about is that in the same way that our tiny local re-inspired Craig to say, yeah, let's go with this, because OEA and UESF are potentially very powerful. I think people should keep in mind that we're in a period not only of great danger in terms of climate change, in terms of war, in terms of the genocide and the militarization of the police and underfunding schools, but we're actually speaking as what you guys say is an OG. We're in a period of enormous, as yet unrealized opportunity. This country is in chaos. People are angry. And when people get angry, things can change in incredibly short periods of time. And if you look at California alone, Newsom's policies embody the kinds of things that have people angry and desperate and voting for Trump. Newsom allowed the pandemic era rent controls and anti-eviction stuff to expire. Newsom has sabotaged solar energy, and instead of municipalizing or statizing PG&E, all of our PG&E bills are skyrocketing. It hits teachers. I teach adults. I hear about it constantly. Nothing has been done to control gas prices. So, as an 81-year-old, the last time I saw American society in such flux was the period from 64 to 69, the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War, both of the birth of the women's liberation movement, which gave birth to the Black Panther Party and the Peace and Freedom Party. And the reason I say this is we shouldn't underestimate that if we can begin to that there's the opening to popularize RCW because it talks to who has the wealth. And because my time's running out, Barbara Lee poses a unique opportunity because to her, we can be saying, why isn't Clorox paying? Why isn't Wells Fargo paying? Why aren't the local companies paying? So the rhetoric can be used to move the base, to force the top to move or be exposed. I'm done.
Thank you so
think
much.
I had 5 minutes. That's 5 minutes.
Yeah, for sure. And, just mad respect to you. 81, still out here in the struggle and keeping track of your time. That's good. Yeah, thank you, sir, for, the history and the context and also a little bit about what's happening in your local. Yes, so thanks to all the presenters. And so hopefully, folks, you've had time to sip your coffee, wake up a little bit, and we are going to have about 20 minutes of discussion in small breakout groups. And then we are going to have a big group discussion. We want to hear from each other. And so if we could move to the next slide, some discussion questions that we have for us today are, number one, what potential does a campaign to redistribute corporate wealth have? What concerns or questions do you have? What questions do you anticipate other teachers or workers in your union or school site will have? Do you think staff at your school site would support this campaign? And if so, are you down to talk to them about it? What steps should we take next as a coalition or as a network of teachers? And how can we link this campaign with our already existing work? Many of the folks who are here today and who are the most prominent activists in our union are also involved in the campaign to divest our pensions, from the war machine, and in a campaign for a free Palestine. So how do we link these two bodies of work and not replicate our work? We're going to put the questions in the chat, and then if we could make 3 breakout groups, Jonah. And when you're in the breakout groups, each of us, facilitators or organizers will be there just to help guide things. and review the questions. And then we'll come back in about 15 minutes and hear from each other in a big group share out.